All right. On to the Antinomy of Pure Reason, Section 3. I'm going to try to go through Section 7, probably not in one sitting, but for this video. And my understanding is this is generally considered the payoff for the previous two sections, these four sections, where Kant kind of explains the upshot of the previous examples and why it's essentially kind of a wrong-headed approach that we take to a lot of these bigger questions. So yeah, let's just get into it. Section 3, of the interest of reason in these conflicts. We have thus watched the whole dialectical play of the cosmological ideas, and have seen that they do not even admit of any object congruent with them to be supplied to them in any possible experience. Okay, fair. Nay, not even of reason to treat them in accordance with the universal laws of experience. Okay, so so there's no object of experience that we can use to solve these crazy problems, and we can't even use our reason consistently or appropriately or effectively, whatever you want to say, in order to solve these issues. In fact, reason probably gets us, ties us up and gets us further away from quote-unquote truth. Nevertheless, these ideas are not arbitrary fictions, but reason in the continuous progress of empirical synthesis is necessarily led to them whenever it wants to free from all conditions and comprehend. It is unconditioned in its unconditioned totality. What, according to the rules of experience, can always be determined only conditionally. So it's looking for answers to unconditioned questions, or potentially understand itself unconditionally, but everything is conditioned. Whenever it wants to free from all conditions and comprehend, in its unconditioned totality, that according to the rules of experience can always be determined only conditionally. Okay. These sophistical assertions are so many attempts at solving four perfectly natural and inevitable problems of reason. There cannot be either more or less of them, because there are neither more nor less series of synthetic presuppositions that limit empirical synthesis a priori. Kant likes his groups of four. It's interesting. I usually associate groups of three as the kind of the golden ratio type of thing. Not golden ratio necessarily, but that is also based on thirds, right? So, but thesis and antithesis, synthesis type of thing. I know it's an oversimplification, but Holy Trinity, stuff like that. Anyway, we have represented the glittering pretensions of reason, extending its domain beyond all the limits of experience only through dry formulas containing nothing but the grounds of its claims. And as it befits transcendental philosophy, we have divested these formulas of everything empirical, although it is only in connection with the empirical that the whole splendor of the assertions of reason can be fully seen. In their application, and in the progressive extension of the use of reason, beginning from the field of experience and gradually soaring up to the sublime ideas, philosophy displays a grandeur which, if it could only establish its pretensions, would leave all other human science far behind, promising to us a safe foundation for our highest expectations and hopes for the attainment of the ultimate ends, in which all the exertions of reason must finally converge. Sounds nice. The questions whether the world has a beginning in any limit of its extension. Okay, that's a big question. I think he discusses this at length as kind of one of the main examples. Whether the world has a beginning in any limit of its extension in space. Oh, he's listing the four maybe. Whether there is anywhere, and it may be in my own thinking self in indivisible and indestructible unity, or nothing but what is divisible and perishable, whether in my actions I am free, like other beings, led by the hand of nature and of fate, whether, finally, there exists some supreme cause of the world, or whether the things of nature and their order form the ultimate object which we can reach in all our speculations. Okay. These are questions for the solution of which the mathematician would gladly sacrifice the whole of science, which cannot give him any satisfaction with regard to the highest and dearest aspirations of humanity. Even the true dignity and worth of mathematics, this pride of human reason, rests on the fact that it teaches reason how to understand. It teaches reason how to understand nature, in what is large and what is small in it, in its order and regularity, and likewise in the admirable unity of its moving forces, far above all expectations of a philosophy, restricted to common experience. And thus it encourages reason to extend its use far beyond experience, right? Kind of theoretical mathematics, or like, I guess just physics that are overarching laws that everything abides by, encourages us to maybe think, maybe we can get to the metaphysical, overarching things that apply to everyone and explain our, et cetera, et cetera. Nay, supply philosophy with the best materials intended to support its investigations, as far as their nature permits, by adequate intuitions. Unfortunately for speculation, but fortunately perhaps for the practical destiny of humanity, reason, in the very midst of its highest expectations, finds itself so overwhelmed by an onrush of arguments and counter-arguments that neither its honor nor even considerations for its safety allow it to retreat and to become an indifferent spectator of a mock combat, still less to command peace in a strife in which reason itself is deeply interested. Thus nothing remains for reason but to reflect on the origin of this conflict, in order to find out whether it may not have arisen from a mere misunderstanding. This is the conflict between math and philosophy. Hold on, I need to reread it. Unfortunately for speculation, but fortunately perhaps for the practical destiny of humanity, reason, in the very midst of its highest expectations, finds itself so overwhelmed by an onrush of arguments and counter-arguments that neither its honor... Oh, it's talking about this battle, I guess. That neither its honor nor even considerations for its safety allow it to retreat, and to become an indifferent spectator of a mock combat, still less to command peace in a strife in which reason itself is deeply interested, right? Meaning, like, it'd be nice if reason could get in there and, or at least watch the two arguments eat each other or something, so we get to truth on the other end. Or maybe actually negotiate peace between the two and we can figure them out. Instead of just having the leftover scraps, but reason can't even do that. Let alone conquer both of them. Argument, counter-argument. Thus nothing remains for reason but to reflect on the origin of this conflict, in order to find out whether it may not have arisen from a mere misunderstanding. In such an inquiry, the proud claims of both sides would no doubt have to be surrendered, but a permanent and tranquil rule of reason over the understanding and the senses would then be inaugurated. For the present, we shall defer this thorough inquiry in order to consider which side we might like to take if it became necessary to choose one of the opposing parties. As in this case, we do not consult the logical touchstone of truth, but only our own interest. Such an inquiry, though settling nothing, as to the contested rights of both parties, will have the advantage of helping us understand why those who take part in this contest embrace one side rather than the other, without being guided by any special insight into the subject matter. It will also explain some other things, as, for instance, the zealous heat of the one and the calm assurance of the other party, and why the world greets one party with rapturous applause, probably the religious side at this point in history, and entertains the implacable prejudice toward the other. Implacable prejudice, sorry. There is, however, something... Bug on the book. Get out of here. Sorry, I feel... okay, kill the bug. on the recording. Okay. There is, however, something in this preliminary inquiry which determines the right point of view from which alone it can be carried on with proper thoroughness. And this is the comparison of the principles from which both parties start. If we look at the propositions of the antithesis, we shall find in it a perfect uniformity. Antithesis. That's what I don't understand. Like, apparently the antitheses and the theses I'm joking, but like go to certain sides of I don't know, can be categorized together. It kind of breaks my brain a little bit. Like the thesis is, I don't know. Well, let's see what he says. But I was listening to a lecture and trying to figure this out, but it wasn't really sinking in. If we look at the propositions... Hold on, I gotta grab a pair of glasses to wear. Okay, and I had to clean them. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. I cannot wear like glasses that have smudges on them. It drives me nuts. Anyway. If we look at the propositions of the antithesis, we shall find in it a perfect uniformity in their way of thinking, a complete unity of maxims, namely the principles of... Okay, so all the antitheses are pure empiricism. Pure empiricism. Okay. Circle that with a pen. Not only in the explanation of the appearances of the world, but also in the solution of the transcendental ideas of the universe itself. The propositions of the thesis, on the other hand, hold on, let's write, oh shit. All thumbs today. Okay, antithesis, and then is pure empiricism, and then the thesis is appearances? Based on appearances? Intellectual beginnings? I don't know. It's not quite as clean. The propositions of the thesis, on the contrary, rest not only on the empirical explanation within the series of appearances, but also on intellectual beginnings, and its maxim is therefore not simple. Okay, not simple. So it's intellectual and empirical, but it's based on appearances and not. Intellectual and empirical plus appearances. But not really trying to figure out, or at least giving up the game related to things in themselves. With regard to its essential and distinguishing characteristics, I should call it the dogmatism. Ooh, that's not good. Dogmatism of pure reason. Okay. I call the side of dogmatism... on the side of dogmatism, in determining the cosmological ideas of reason, or on the side of the thesis... Oh, wait. We find, firstly, on the side of dogmatism... Okay, I'm not really sure. I thought dogmatism was... Okay. Maybe dogmatism can potentially apply to both. I thought he was saying it applied to the theses, but maybe not. exclusively. Okay, on the side of dogmatism in determining the cosmological ideas of reason, or on the side of the thesis, we find, firstly, a certain practical interest, which every well-disposed person, if he knows what is truly of advantage to him, will heartily share. Okay, so we have a practical interest. That the world has a beginning, that my thinking self is of simple and therefore indestructible nature. So the world has a beginning, the self is simple, the soul is simple, like whatever. The same self is free in all voluntary actions. Okay, free will. I'm going to make a little chart here. Let's make a chart. Or maybe I'll make a post-it. This seems like good post-it stuff. Okay. Okay, so we got on the side of the thesis, I got a thesis posted here. Taking post-it off with one hand. Okay, practical interest, which every well-disposed person, if he knows what is truly advantage to him, will heartily share. So this is called practical interest, but is this are these the theses? Okay, whatever. I'm just gonna write them down. So one. For the first one, we have world has beginning. Okay. 2. Self is simple. So I'm just gonna put soul is simple. Is simple. Indivisible. And indestructible. That the same self is free in all his voluntary actions. Okay. 3. Free will. Okay. Sounds a lot like Christianity. And raised above the compulsion of nature. And then finally, the whole order of things, or the world, derives its origin from an original being. Okay, world origin is God. I'm just going to put God. I know it's not, he's not saying God, but... okay. So let's highlight that stuff really quick. Whence everything receives both unity and purposive connection. These are so many foundation stones of morality and religion. The antithesis robs us, or seems to rob us, of all these supports. Okay, so let me just put thesis, and then obviously... we don't have to write the antithesis. It's just going to be the opposite of these things. Okay. Secondly, reason has a certain speculative interest on the side of thesis. Interesting. For if we take and use the transcendental ideas as they are in the thesis, then one may completely a priori grasp the whole chain of conditions and comprehend the derivation of the conditioned by beginning with the unconditioned. Right? It's kind of satisfying, right? It's like, world has a beginning, everything can be tracked, into, there's a causal chain, and everything can be tracked in the world and accounted for. So it started with a being, it obviously then has a beginning. The soul is simple and therefore eternal, so the souls were created at that time, and they've just been bouncing around since then, and the souls have free will. That's the only one where I don't. It does if there is a causal chain, that kind of seems contrary to the free will part of that. That's the only part I don't really understand. Because if there's a chain of causality there, you would think that how do you break out of the causal chain with free will? This might just be the typical Christianity. Maybe it's specific to Catholicism. I don't know that much about other religions, but like the idea of God's preordained divine plan, but also there's some ability to exercise free will within that plan, even though God knows what's going to happen, has already determined it effectively, which I never really got. Maybe that's why I'm a bad Catholic and not a Catholic anymore. But anyway, this cannot be achieved by the antithesis, which presents itself in a very unfavorable light, because it cannot give to the question as to the conditions of its synthesis any answer, which does not constantly lead to new questions. So the antithesis always leads to new questions. That bastard. But the thesis just points to God and stuff like that. Always plus questions. Oh, I need some coffee. According to it, one has always to ascend from a given beginning to a higher one. Every part leads always to a still smaller part. Every event has always before it another event and its cause. And the conditions of existence in general always rest on others, without ever receiving unconditioned strength and support from a self-subsisting thing as the original being. Yeah, well. Tough shit, I don't know. Thirdly, this side has also the advantage of popularity, okay, which is by no means its smallest recommendation. The common understanding does not see the least difficulty in the ideas of the unconditioned beginning of all synthesis, being accustomed rather to descending to consequences than to ascending to grounds. Okay. So in what sense is... Okay, so the thesis is descending to consequences, meaning we can scale it back, or trace it back, rather, to original causes, right? But the antithesis, world has no beginning, soul is not simple, there's no free will. Why? I just don't understand the ascending metaphor necessarily for that. But we're looking for higher principles that govern everything that aren't necessarily traceable back to a beginning. Rather, that's maybe more like physics that he pointed to earlier. He didn't point to physics specifically, but talked about math. And that's like the overarching kind of rules of the universe that you ascend to, like you figure them out, you reason to them. I know that both sides cannot be reasoned to, is Kant's point, but okay, I guess it kind of makes sense. I shouldn't get too hung up on that necessarily. Thirdly, this side also has the advantage of popularity, which is by no means its smallest recommendation. The common understanding does not see the least difficulty in the ideas of the unconditioned beginning of all synthesis, being accustomed rather to descending to consequences than to ascending to grounds. Okay. It finds in the ideas of the absolutely first, the possibility of which does not trouble it, both a comfort, at the same time a firm point to which the leading strings of its life may be attached, while there is no pleasure in a restless ascent from condition to condition, and in always keeping one foot in the air. That makes sense. It's pretty comforting to just be like, okay, we can trace everything back to this original God, as opposed to being like, okay, well, what causes that? Well, it wouldn't be a cause necessarily, but what explains this? And you're just constantly explaining things with other things. And like you said, it's a pretty good metaphor. 1 foot on the clouds, was it? 1 foot in the air. On the side of empiricism, insofar as it determines the cosmological ideas of reason, or on the side of the antithesis, there is, firstly, no practical interest arising from the pure principles of reason, such as morality and religion possess. Oh, come on. On the side of empiricism, insofar as it... Why, Kant? Just because, like, if we're just basing it on observations, experience, etc., like, there's no higher power to appeal to? Or is it because we don't have free will? I don't know. Let's see. On the contrary, empiricism seems to deprive both of these of all power, religion and morality, and influence. If there is no original being distinct from the world is without a beginning. I need a new highlighter. This one's shot. If there is no original being distinct from the world, if the world is without a beginning, and therefore without a creator, if our will is not free, and our soul has the same divisibility, destructibility as matter, then moral ideas and principles also lose all validity, and fall with the transcendental ideas which formed their theoretical support. I'm not following this. This just seems like if we didn't have religion, people just run around raping and murdering everybody because we need rules. I'm going to read it again. I'm going to give him First, no practical interest arising from pure principles of reason, such as morality, is just this moral relativism. If you start with reason and you try to reason out every moral problem, what the fuck do we get from world has to be? So, whatever. Sorry. I'm taking this too personally. Such as morality and religion possess. On the contrary, empiricism seems to deprive both of these of all power and influence. Okay. If there is no original being distinct from the world, if the world is without a beginning and therefore without a creator, if our will is not free, I mean, that's the big one to me. Like, maybe that's really what he's getting at. I could get on board with that. Like, if you can't make a decision, there's no morality. Because you don't have the ability to choose amongst, like, competing moral ideas. So what is morality at that point? Pretty dangerous idea, but anyway. And our soul has the same divisibility and destructibility as matter, then moral ideas and principles also lose all validity, and fall with the transcendental ideas, which form their theoretical support. Okay, just gonna move on. Secondly, on the contrary, empiricism offers advantages to the speculative interests of reason which are very tempting, and far exceed those which the dogmatic teacher can promise. According to the empiricist, the understanding is always on its own proper ground, namely the field of possible experiences, the laws which may be investigated and used to expand its certain and comprehensible knowledge without end. Okay. Here, every object can and ought to be exhibited to intuition, both in itself and in its relations, or at least its concepts, the images of which can be clearly and distinctly presented in given similar intuitions. It makes sense. Empiricism gives us, like, identifiable and very concrete examples of things that we can measure and experience and test, etc. And therefore, to use an empirical point of view for these bigger questions might be, I don't know, just more intuitive and satisfying for us, even if it's not possible. Not only is there no need for the understanding to leave this chain of the order of nature so as to lay hold of ideas, the objects of which are not known, because as mere entities of thought, they can never be given. But the understanding is not even allowed to leave its proper business and to cross over, under the pretense that a business is finished, into the domain of idealizing reason, into transcendent concepts, where it need no longer observe and investigate according to the laws of nature, but only think and invent, without any risk of being contradicted by the facts of nature. for it is not bound by their evidence, but is justified in passing them by, or even subordinating them to a higher authority, namely that of pure reason. Okay, that was a long sentence, Con. I would suggest a rewrite, but okay. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Like, the anti-empiricists, they don't have to deal with reality at all. They can just appeal to a creator, higher power, these indefinable things, and not have to deal with maybe contradictions in reality and stuff, which the empiricists have to deal with. Which, it's obviously, advantage theses. Hence, the empiricists will never allow that any epoch of nature should be considered as the absolutely first, or that any limit of his view over the range of nature should be considered as the outermost. He will not approve a transition from the objects of nature, which he can analyze by observation and mathematics, and which he can determine synthetically in intuition, that is, from the extended, to those which neither sense nor imagination can ever represent in concreto, to the simple. Nor will he allow us to presuppose a faculty, even in nature, of acting independently of the laws of nature, and thus to narrow the operations of the understanding in investigating, according to the necessary rules, the origin of appearances. Lastly, he will never tolerate the cause of anything should be looked for anywhere outside of nature. Makes sense. In an original being, because we know nothing but nature, which alone can offer us objects and instruct us as to their laws. Okay. If the empirical philosopher had no other purpose with his antithesis but to put down the rashness and presumption of reason in mistaking its true destiny, while boasting of insight and knowledge, where insight and knowledge come to an end, nay, while representing as a real advancement of speculative inquiry that which might have been allowed to pass only on account of serving practical interests, in order, when it is so disposed, either to break the thread of physical inquiry or to fasten it, with the pretense of expanding our knowledge to transcendental ideas, fuck me, this sentence, which really teach us nothing, but that we owe nothing. Okay, I think what he's going to say is, if the empirical philosopher stopped at saying we can't know all this thesis shit, like, it's just impossible to know, and it's outside of our experience, and therefore not grounded on anything. If they just stopped at that and said we can't know the other side, they are, as empiricists, taking a side. But if they didn't take a side and just pointed out the flaws of the other side, I think Kant would be okay with that. But they probably don't just do that. If I say the empiricists were satisfied with this aim, then his principle would only serve to teach us to be moderate in claims, and modest in our assertions, and encourage the greatest possible expansion of our understanding through the true teacher given to us, namely experience. For in such a case we should not be deprived of our own intellectual presuppositions, or of our faith in their influence on our practical interests. I gotta read that again, sorry. If I say the empiricists were satisfied in this aim, then his principle would only serve to teach us to be moderate in claims and modest in our assertions, and encourage the greatest possible expansion of our understanding through the true teacher given to us, experience. For in such a case we should not be deprived of our own intellectual presuppositions or of our faith in their influence on our practical interests. They would only have lost the pompous titles of science and rational insight, because true speculative knowledge can never have any other object but an object of experience. And if we transcend the limits of experience, then our synthesis, which seeks new kinds of knowledge independent of experience, lacks the substratum of intuition on which alone it could be executed. As it is, empiricism itself often becomes dogmatic with regard to ideas and boldly denies what goes beyond the sphere of its intuitive knowledge, and thus itself becomes guilty of the want of modesty. Which here is all the more reprehensible, because an irreparable injury is thereby inflicted on the practical interests of reason. This constitutes the conflict of Epicureanism and Platonism. If either party says more than it knows, but while the former encourages and advances knowledge, although at the expense of practical interest, the latter supplies excellent practical principles. But with regard to everything of which we can only have speculative knowledge, it allows reason to indulge in ideal explanations of natural appearances and neglect physical investigation. I thought he would have gone with like Church versus Newton. I guess Epicureanism versus Platonism is a little safer. Won't get him burned at the stake. With regard finally to the third point, which has to be considered in a preliminary choice between two opposing parties, it is very strange that empiricism should be so unpopular, though it might be supposed that the common understanding would readily accept a theory which promises to satisfy it through nothing but empirical knowledge and its rational coherence. Yeah, it seems like it should be popular. Not if the church has anything to say about it, but while transcendental dogmatism forces it to ascend to concepts which far surpass the insight and rational faculties of most practiced thinkers. But here's the real motive. The common it's funny, in my head I have like peasants. I have like circa, what is this, like 1815. When did he write this? And that's not what he's talking about, right? He's talking about other intellectuals. But in my head I'm like, what is the average farmer, like the average beet farmer in Austria around this time think? Like, are they going to go with empiricism, or are they going to go with the more ethereal side of things? And frankly, I don't know. Probably, I don't know. I would say probably religion. But here's the real motive. The common understanding finds itself in a situation in which even the most learned can claim no advantage over it. If it knows little or nothing, and yet no one can boast of knowing much more, and though it may not be able to express itself in so scholastically correct a manner as others, yet it can do infinitely more by way of sophistical arguments. Is that a good thing? For it moves about among mere ideas, about which it is easy to be eloquent because no one knows anything about them. Fair. This is like kind of the post-truth world we live in, to be honest with you. This has become everything in modern society, but anyway. The same person would have to be entirely silent, or would have to confess his ignorance with regard to investigations of nature. Indolence, therefore, and vanity are strongly in favor of those principles. Besides, although a true philosopher finds it extremely hard to accept the principle of which he can give no reasonable account, mere mortals have no problem with that. Still more to introduce concepts the objective reality of which cannot be established. Nothing comes more naturally to the common understanding that wants something with which it can operate securely. Yeah, I called it. The difficulty of comprehending such a supposition does not disquiet common understanding, because not knowing what comprehending really means, this difficulty never occurs to it, and it takes everything as known that has become familiar to it through frequent use. It takes everything as known that has become familiar to it through frequent use. Yeah. This is like confirmation bias type of stuff. At last, all speculative interest disappears before the practical, and the common understanding imagines that it understands and knows what it fears, and hopes impel it to accept or believe. Thus, the empiricism of a transcendentally idealizing reason loses all popularity, and, however prejudicial it may be to the supreme practical principles, there is no reason to fear that it will ever pass the limits of the school and obtain considerable authority in communal life or any favor with the multitude. Okay, religion safe. Human reason is by its nature architectonic, good word, and looks upon all knowledge as belonging to a possible system. True. It therefore allows only such principles as do not render an attainable knowledge incapable of being associated with other knowledge in some system. What? What? It therefore allows only such principles. Okay, it only allows certain principles as do not render. So it only accepts principles that do not render an attainable knowledge, incapable of being associated with other knowledge in some system. So let's see. It therefore allows positive only negative such principles as do not negative an attainable positive knowledge positive incapable negative of being associated with other knowledge in some system. Like that's rough. The propositions of the antithesis, however, are of such a character that they render the completion of any edifice of knowledge quite impossible. According to them, beyond every state of the world there is always a still older state, in every part still other and further divisible parts. Prior to every event still another event, which again was produced elsewhere. And everything in existence is always only conditioned without an unconditioned, and first existence anywhere. As therefore the antithesis allows of nothing that is first, and no beginning which could serve as the foundation of the structure, a complete edifice of knowledge is entirely impossible on such presuppositions. Hence the architectonic interest of reason, which demands not empirical but pure a priori rational unity, serves as a natural recommendation for the assertions of the thesis. But if a person could free himself of all such interests and consider the assertions of reason, without concern about their consequences, merely according to the value of their grounds, he would find himself, if he knew, of no escape from the onrush except by adhering to one or the other of these conflicting doctrines in a state of constant oscillation. Right. If and this is the point he's going to make, is like the two opposing side choice is totally wrong way to think about stuff. Today, he would be convinced that the human will is free. Tomorrow, when considering the indissoluble chain of nature, he would think that freedom is nothing but self-deception, and all would be merely nature. When afterwards he came to act, this play of merely speculative reason would vanish like the shadows of a dream, and would choose his principles only according to practical interests. But as it well befits a reflecting and inquiring being to devote a certain time entirely to the examination of his own reason, as we are right now, divesting himself of all partiality, and then to submit his observations publicly, I guess I'm posting this online, to the judgment of others, no one ought to be blamed for, still less prevented from presenting for trial the propositions as well as the counter propositions, so that they may well defend themselves without being terrified of being killed by the church, without being terrified by threats before a jury chosen from his own class, that is, the class of feeble men. Okay, well, this took way long. I thought I might be able to, the section 4 is not that long. Section 5, not that long. Section 6, not that long. Section 7, also not that long. So it's only 20 pages for the next 4 sections, but that was like 10 pages alone. 19 to 20, that's 9 pages. Anyway, so I'm going to post this as an individual standalone section 3, and then I'll move on to section 4. And I think I'll do probably section 4 through 7 together. But this was great. This was pretty easy to follow and makes a lot of sense. And it's, I don't know, it seems to be one of the favorite parts of the critique of pure reason based on kind of what I've seen online related to like philosophy videos and stuff. And yeah, it's really good so far.